Good evening. I am Kimberly Jeffries Leonard, National President of the Links Incorporated. I am so pleased that we are partnering with the National Medical Association to bring you our town hall this evening, Clinical Vaccine Trials and the Black Community, Facts and Fallacies. Before I continue, I want to take a moment to thank our essential workers. They are still on the front lines, they are still risking their lives, and they are still helping us get through this pandemic. For 8 months, we have been in a fight for our lives against COVID-19. With over 1,100,000 reported cases and 250,000 deaths, it doesn't matter who you are. You've likely been touched by this disease in some way, shape, or form. As of late, there has been much talk of vaccines and clinical trials, perhaps signaling a light at the end of a very long tunnel. However, our community has a long history of mistrust when it comes to the medical community and clinical trials, and rightly so. We only need to look at the Tuskegee study and Henrietta Lacks for examples of this. We also know that Blacks have been underrepresented in clinical trials. We also know that we are disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And as we get closer to a vaccine, all of these things are very important, which brings us to our panel tonight. We are thrilled to be able to partner with the National Medical Association to bring you this esteemed panel. And I am thrilled to introduce the National President of the National Medical Association, Dr. Leon McDougle, Professor of Family Medicine, the first Chief Diversity Officer for the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, to bring you greetings tonight also. Dr. McDougle.
Thank you, President Jeffries Leonard. I bring you greetings from the National Medical Association. This is our 125th anniversary, and to be able to build a coalition and work on collaborative projects with Links Incorporated is just so wonderful. And you'll hear some excellent speakers this evening to help enlighten our community about the concerns, to dispel fallacies, and to engage the audience. This is a team effort. All hands need to be on deck. So again, thank you, President Jeffries Leonard, and have a great evening.
Thank you, President McDougle. In addition to President McDougle, as a part of our esteemed panel, we have with us tonight Dr. Kizzmekia S. Corbett, a research fellow and scientific lead for the coronavirus vaccines and immunopathogenesis team at the National Institutes of Health, National Institute of Allergy, Infectious Diseases, and Vaccine Research Center. I know you have seen her in the news, and we're thrilled that she's here. We also have Dr. Hlatshwayo Davis, a clinical instructor in infectious diseases at Washington University School of Medicine and the John Cochran VA Medical Center in St. Louis, as well as a renowned infectious disease physician and researcher. We're also so thrilled to have her here. And to moderate this phenomenal panel, our very own Dr. Virginia D. Banks, an infectious disease physician with the Northeast Ohio Infectious Disease Associates, co-chair of our COVID-19 task force, and a member of the Youngstown, Ohio chapter. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Dr. Banks.
Thank you, Link Kim, and thank you, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for taking out your time this evening to talk about what is going to be a wonderful topic tonight. I'm looking forward to a robust discussion. First, I would like to thank, if we could have our slide, please. It takes a village. I would like to thank first our National COVID-19 Task Force, especially my co-chair, Link Judy Carmichael Brown, who's from the Circle City, Indianapolis chapter, Link Virginia Kane from the Indianapolis, Indiana chapter, Link Jocelyn Freeman Garrett from the Alameda Contra Costa, California chapter, Link Marcia Bowden Marche from Shelby County, Tennessee, Link Nicolette Martin from Arlington, Virginia, Link Regina Miltier Rock from Reston, Virginia, Link Monica Parker from Athens, Georgia, and link our Linda Westbrook from the Crescent City, Louisiana chapter. Thank you all. We're going to have a wonderful presentation tonight by our three esteemed presenters and colleagues, I might add. I'm going to start by introducing Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. If many of you, maybe many of you saw the wonderful, she got my attention. There was a wonderful Washington Post article that came out in May 2020, talking about this young lady who was on the cusp of vaccine development. And, you know, I sort of had to sit up because I usually am trying to get all my newspaper articles done in the morning. And I said, well, this is fantastic. And so we are so fortunate to have her on our panel tonight. Dr. Corbett, I am going to toss the baton to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And of course, it is a pleasure, as always, to be amongst family as I see it. And so I'm just going to give a little bit of background about the vaccine development efforts that are happening, not just internally with us at the National Institutes of Health, where I serve as the scientific lead for the coronavirus vaccine team in the Vaccine Research Center, but around the globe, and particularly in the US. So it goes without saying that we have a serious problem on our hand with COVID-19, particularly now as we are in what is the so-called flu season, where this third wave of the disease is hitting the US, and we are having record numbers of cases and deaths on a day-to-day basis. So one of the things that is important to note from a vaccine standpoint is that you need about 60% community or population immunity in order to control the spread of the virus. So if we depended on the virus to do that alone, about 40 million people around the globe would unfortunately die from COVID-19. And so it's obvious at this point that we need a vaccine in order to prevent the dynamics of the pandemic. Also, as was introduced already, there are COVID-19 disease inequalities that largely mean that Black and Brown people are disproportionately affected by the virus, both from a case perspective and from a death perspective. And there are social and economic structural determinants for those inequalities that we've become more aware of. And I think viruses like this and like HIV, et cetera, have highlighted in our overrepresentation in exposure to these diseases. And so when we think about a vaccine, I particularly think about a vaccine from a public health perspective, and particularly from a way to really level the playing field for prevention of disease. And that comes by way of benefiting the individual. So by reducing the severity of illness or preventing infection. And then of course, on a community level, reducing transmission so that we're able to resume our normal activities. So in the media, there's this so-called herd immunity. And while we think about it from an infection perspective, it really was birthed out of the idea of vaccinology, where you can see in this slide, there are two groups of people. There's a population that is blue and not immune. And then there's a population where the green people represent people that are immune. So if you were to release a virus into those two populations, into the non-immune population, you'll see that there's high transmission. Many of the people in that population are infected or turn red. And then in an immune population, the green people do not have the ability to be infected or transmit the disease. So there's low transmission and only a small subset of the population can potentially be infected. And so achieving this kind of immunity comes in multiple ways. You've heard about it by the media by way of infection, but what's important to know, particularly in our community, as we weigh the options, the option of being vaccinated versus just so-called contracting this immunity via natural infection, is that natural infection has a potential to cause severe illness, and it is killing us at disproportional rates. And the one thing that we don't know from a scientific perspective is how well natural infection can actually prevent you from having an immune response, and we know that it's a highly variable immune response following natural infection. And so the way that we go about this is really most eloquently done by vaccination. And it doesn't matter, you'll hear about multiple different platforms. And what that means is that's the way that the vaccine is delivered. But the end result is that you're delivered something to your immune system that is safe and efficacious, as it's been proven through clinical trial, that allows your body to mount an immune response against the virus to prevent infection and disease later. There are other ways of which you hear about this by plasma therapy or monoclonal antibodies, for example, that's being developed by Eli Lilly. But focusing on the vaccine part, one of the things that our community fails to understand, particularly as we have this so-called Operation Warp Speed, is that a lot of things have gone into this development of these first mRNA vaccines that you see from Pfizer and Moderna. The one thing that is important to note is that we moved very quickly in my group at the National Institutes of Health that is led by Dr. Barney Graham, in our collaboration with Moderna, because we knew so much about the viruses that are related to the virus that causes COVID-19 from our extensive work in the past. And so this vaccine development is happening at world record speed. We were in phase 1 clinical trial in only 66 days, and you've heard all about that. But what people don't understand is that there is a body of research built around this entire platform and understanding how to best mount an immune response in a person for vaccine for a coronavirus that we worked on with other related coronavirus previously. And so I think that's a really important piece for us to understand. And really what went into that work was just basic fundamental biology, understanding how coronavirus infect, understanding how to build an immune response, particularly to what's called a spike protein, which is basically the key that the coronavirus uses to unlock your cell, to get inside of your cell and start an infection. So if you can block that key from locking or unlocking your cell, you can effectively block an infection. And so that's what we're trying to do with a vaccine. And so we studied all of those things, and we had this collaboration already instated with Moderna from years and years and years. And so Moderna has this technology that is new. It's called messenger RNA. It's a way that we can deliver just that spike protein, not the virus, but basically by giving a code to your body's cells and telling your cells to make that protein, and then that protein alerts your cells to make an immune response. And we knew so much about how to do this that we were able to use our knowledge in only 4 days to put that type of material into what's called GMP production. So that's the type of production that a manufacturer like Moderna uses for clinical grade material. And then Moderna was able to ship that vaccine really quickly because they've really revolutionized this approach around making this vaccine platform. And they've engineered this for several years. And so they're really experts at this. And the utility of these new platforms is really rapid because you're able to scale up. What that means is that you're able to make really large batches very quickly. And so the phase 1 clinical trial starts, and I don't want to go into any data around that, only to say that it was showed to be really promising and very safe in the phase 1 clinical trial. And altogether, aside from Moderna, there is a vaccine platform around, vaccine pipeline around the globe that encompasses over 200 different vaccines for COVID-19. And while you hear most about the Pfizer and Moderna candidates, there are continuous rollouts of different phases of these clinical trials that inform us around the safety and around the efficacy of these vaccines. So I just want to zone in on what's called the phase 3, because this, over the past couple of weeks, we've all been alerted to what are called efficacy signals in these phase 3 clinical trials, where they're large scale clinical trials that these companies run in order to determine just one simple fact: does the vaccine work at preventing COVID-19 disease? And in the portfolio for the US phase 3 clinical trials, there are 5 vaccines currently that are administering whatever platform they have to deliver that spike protein to your body and excite your immune system. And so the phase 3 clinical trials are really guided around a body of work that was happening in animals, non-human primates, and all of the work from the phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials that showed us that the vaccine was potentially safe in humans and potentially efficacious. And so now that the front runners have shown their what are considered to be very promising efficacy results at about 95%, I just want to break down what that really means. So these trials are randomized, placebo-controlled. I know you've probably heard Dr. Fauci say it a million times every time he speaks. And what that means is that you have a large group of people, 30,000 total people. The group is split in half. So 50,000 people get a vaccine, and then 15,000 people get a vaccine, and then 15,000 people get a placebo, which is just salt water, essentially. After they receive either their vaccine or the placebo, they go off into their normal lives, and they don't know whether they got the vaccine or the placebo, and neither do the researchers. The researchers also have no idea. And then if they present COVID-19 symptoms, it can be anything from fatigue to a headache to a runny nose, a cough, etc. They go back to their trial physician who diagnoses them with a COVID case or not. And then those cases are counted. And there's a separate review board that's external of the company that reviews the counts on those cases in a large data file, and they determine what's called the vaccine efficacy. So this is the percent more COVID cases in the placebo group than the vaccine group. In this example on the far right side, you'll see that 2 volunteers in the vaccine group got COVID and 18 volunteers in the placebo group got COVID. And so that means that there is a 90% efficacy. So there's a 90% reduced risk of getting the vaccine as compared to not having the vaccine. In the Moderna trial, that's 95% because the number was 90 cases in the placebo group over a total of 95 cases. I do want to say that also that number, there was 10 of those cases that were severe, and they all ended up being in the placebo group. So what that says is that the vaccine is very highly efficacious and that it prevents mild disease, and even furthermore, is preventing very severe disease, which could potentially result in hospitalization or death. And so one of the things that is very important in these clinical trials is that the volunteer demographics mirror what the US population shows. And so about 13.4% of the population in the United States is African American. Moderna slowed their enrollment actually at about 6% because they weren't seeing the numbers of African Americans enrolled in their trial to really inform about the safety and efficacy in the subpopulation groups. So they slowed the trial down, enrolled at finally a 10% proportion of Black and African American people in their phase 3 clinical trial, accompanied by 20% Hispanic and Latinx and others. And also, there was a substantial amount of people in the trial that had comorbidities that align with the types of comorbidities that African Americans generally see, that comorbidities that track with disease from COVID-19. And all in all, taking this data together, what is of note is that the safety and efficacy is equal in these subgroups and amongst the people with the comorbidities. And so I end on that note only to say that there was lots of data that really fueled this so-called warp speed development of the vaccines. But one of the things that's important is that it's really science-based knowledge that helped to move these vaccines forward, and a really intricate collaboration between government and pharma that helped to move them forward very quickly. And also the advocacy of groups such as this, National Medical Association, et cetera, that was adamant about inclusion and diversity in the clinical trials, so that at the end of it all, when there is a vaccine, we'll be able to fairly trust it in our community as being safe and efficacious for us as it is for the entire general population. And with that, I'll close. Thank you.
Dr. Corbett, thank you. That was outstanding. Excellent. Kim? Did you have any comments before we go on?
No, I just want to thank Dr. Corbett because these are the questions that I know that all of us have been asking, and to have them answered so eloquently in your hands means so much to us as a community. So thank you.
Again, thank you. Our next speaker, she happens to be a friend of my daughter. I think that may be how we sort of connected a little bit, but I think one day I was watching MSNBC and there was this young physician who was talking about COVID-19 and vaccines, and we happen to have her here tonight. She also has been on the BBC, if you've been watching that. Dr. Hlatshwayo Davis will be presenting to us tonight on a topic that I think is near and dear to all of us. When we talk about, as has been said, vaccines don't prevent diseases, vaccinations do. And so by that, I mean, if we cannot get this vaccination, these vaccines into the hands of, or give them to those individuals that need them, I think we won't be much farther than where we are today. So Dr. Davis is going to talk to us this evening about mistrust, trust and mistrust, facts and fallacies with respect to COVID-19 vaccines. Dr. Davis. You might be muted.
Thank you so much for having me with you this evening. So I will tell you a little bit about myself. I have a joint contract with the Washington University School of Medicine and the John Cochrane VA Medical Center. And my passions really lie within the areas of HIV, COVID, and community engagement, but also align with inclusion and diversity, which is why this topic is near and dear to my heart. So what are my objectives for this brief time that I have with you? Well, there are three main things that I hope we can walk away having a better understanding of this evening. First is to describe the relationship between disparities and mistrust, to then provide you with a history of mistrust in our community specifically in the context of medicine and research. And then lastly, to show how that mistrust impacts our participation in medicine and in research. So a little background to get us started. The United States has become increasingly diverse within the last century. In 2010, the US Census informed us that approximately 36% of the population belongs to some racial or ethnic minority group. This number is expected to increase every year. And let me further bring that point home with a graphic here. So this shows the distribution of the US population by race and ethnicity, comparing 2016 with a projection to 2050. And what you see on the left is that people of color in 2016 comprised 39% of the population. However, that is projected to increase dramatically by 2050 to 52%, making people of color the new norm of the majority. And I think that's important for multiple reasons and may account for some of the issues underlying systemic and institutional racism that we see today. So first, I think it's important for us to talk about health disparities and to very clearly set the stage for what we mean when we talk about this. So health disparities are preventable differences in the burden of disease, in the burden of injury, in the burden of violence, but also in opportunities. And this results in people being unable to achieve optimal health and in socially disadvantaged racial, ethnic, and other populations. I don't know that we can talk about this without really going back to the beginning, to our history, to our roots, and to where this started. And for us, that has to be with slavery. The history of human experimentation is as old as the practice of medicine. The use of slaves and free Black people as subjects for dissection and medical experimentation was commonplace during slavery, I'm ashamed to say. Slaves were often subjects of medical experiments because physicians, and I should say physicians at that time, needed bodies, and the state considered us property. We were also denied our legal rights to refuse to participate in these studies. And I think it's really important to understand exactly what that looked like. So first, a few quotes. These are for two physicians at the time. So in Baltimore, the bodies of people exclusively are taken for dissection. This is from Harriet Martineau, a visiting physician from France in 1835. She said, because the whites do not like it and the colored people cannot resist. Another quote, this one from Dr. Theodore Weld. Public opinion would tolerate surgical experiments, operations, processes performed upon them, and by them he means slaves, which it would execrate if performed upon their master or other whites, he then went on to say. There are three main examples here that I think are notable to go through as we talk about what this actually looked like in real time. The first is from a physician at the time by the name of Dr. Thomas Hamilton. And he conducted a series of brutal experiments on slaves to test remedies for heat stroke. And what he did was the following. A slave loaned to him was made to sit naked on a stool placed on a platform in a pit that had been heated to a high temperature. Only the man's head was above ground. Over 2 to 3 weeks, Hamilton placed the slave in question, whose name was Fed, in the pit 5 or 6 times and gave him various medications to determine which enabled him to best withstand the heat. Each ordeal ended when Fed fainted and had to actually be revived. Its whole purpose was to make it possible for masters to force slaves to work still longer hours on the hottest of days. The second, Dr. Marion J. Sims, who is still in many texts considered to be the father of modern gynecology, used 3 Alabama slave women to develop an operation to repair vesicovaginal fistulas. This was between 1845 to 1849, where 3 slave women had up to 30 painful operations. I want to read you a quote from him where he describes one of the many failures and notes, the whole urethra and the neck of the bladder were in a high state of inflammation, which came from the foreign substance. It had to come away, and there was nothing to do but to pull it away by main force. Lucy's agony was extreme. She was much prostrated, and I thought she was going to die. But by irrigating the parts of the bladder, she recovered with great rapidity. Sims finally did perfect his technique and ultimately repaired the fistulas. However, what I have to make very clear here is he did so without any measure of anesthesia, although the anesthesia was provided to white female volunteers. But lastly, I want to go to 1951 and talk about Henrietta Lacks, who was diagnosed with terminal cancer and died at the age of 31. She was treated by George J. from Johns Hopkins, who collected cervical cells without consent. He discovered that these cells could not be kept alive, but would also grow indefinitely. And those cells, AKA HeLa cells, have been used in experiments ranging from the effects of long-term radiation to the testing even the polio vaccine to this day. Lack's family, however, did not know the cell cultures even existed until more than 20 years after her death. And then I would be remiss if I didn't spend some time talking about the Tuskegee Experiment. And many people, you know, it's interesting to me as I teach and as I work with fellows, how people roll their eyes when they bring this up or try to act like this is dated. Let's talk about it and then see if we still feel that way at the end. So this was an experiment that started in 1932 all the way through 1972. At the time, there was no known treatment for syphilis. And originally there were 600 Black men in Macon County, Alabama, 399 with latent syphilis and 201 who were disease-free. And only placebos were given, even though they were told that there would be a treatment given, and penicillin had become the standard of care in 1947. But beyond that, still only placebos were given. This resulted in significant morbidity and mortality. By 1972, 28 participants had died from syphilis. More than 100 had passed away from related complications, and at least 40 spouses had been diagnosed, as well as 19 children born with congenital syphilis. The legacy of this experiment, with its failure to educate study participants and treat them adequately, laid the foundation for today's pervasive sense of Black mistrust of public health authorities. This is a direct quote from Dr. Stephen B. Thomas and Dr. Sandra Quinn, who are experts in this field. For me, Tuskegee must live on. For me, it is imperative that we continue to talk about it, because until we have broken the chains of systemic and institutional racism, this will continue to be relevant. And I will tell you, as someone who continues to see patients actively, both at Washington University and the John Cochrane VA, I have had patients bring up Tuskegee to this day as citing why they have not accessed care and why they will not partake in critical medicines that we offer them. It is very relevant, and it will continue to be. So I've mentioned now structural racism, and let's get to the core of what we mean when we talk about structural racism. Structural racism has been in existence since the founding of colonial America. And what I mean here when I talk about it is very difficult. I think sometimes we all use this term, but if you were pushed to give a definition, I think it can be hard to qualify this. So I'll give a few notable examples from some experts that I think we all respect on this call today. The NAACP president, Dr. Derek Johnson, said, it describes the systems and structures that have procedures or processes that specifically disadvantage our community. Glenn Harris, a president of Race Forward and publisher of Caroline, says, it's the complex interaction of culture, of policy, and of institutions that holds in place the outcomes we see in our day-to-day lives. Systemic racism, quite simply, is naming the process of white supremacy. The final outcome of this is that we see reinforced discriminatory beliefs, values, and resources. And ultimately, we see these racial disparities that I talked about earlier on my presentation in very real ways. And how these manifest, Dr. Corbett so eloquently put, is through the social determinants of health, where unemployment, in housing, in education, in food security, in transport, incarceration, we ultimately see the disproportional impact of COVID-19 and other chronic and acute medical conditions on Black and Brown communities. And so this is the whole foundation upon which this medical mistrust is built. It's the tendency to distrust institutions of medicine and of research that represent the dominant culture due to these past and present, right? This is happening to this day. Discrimination and racial persecution that many medical conspiracy theories have then evolved, rightfully so. And while others make fun of them, I think we can all understand exactly why they persist. These theories further perpetuate medical mistrust. However, it goes beyond that. Given patients are often in vulnerable positions, a lack of trust can lead to very poor outcomes. And lastly, medical mistrust in our communities are because of these personal experiences that we see and these social determinants of health are the reason why we are seeing such poor outcomes in both disease and underrepresentation in clinical trials. And this cartoon is just to show you that this is manifesting in so many medical conditions. If you look at the dark purple that represents African Americans, you can see that we're more likely to be disproportionately impacted in high blood pressures, in diabetes, in strokes, in countless other conditions. And here we are in 2020, still talking about this and seeing it in grossly significant ways in COVID-19. And so where are we? Well, first, I think it's important to talk about how data transparency is one of the key ways that we're going to start to make improvements in this area. US states or territories that have released COVID-19 data according to race are broken down into 3 critical categories. Confirmed cases are now being represented in 50 out of 56 of these states or territories, death in 50 out of 56, but testing only in 7 out of 56. And we cannot get accurate data if we do not have transparency. It's essential for policymakers and leaders to inform their response to the pandemic and shed light on disparities by having access to this data. Dr. Corbett already talked about this data, but what is devastating here is we're currently seeing nationwide that our community is dying at 2.1 times the rate of white people. And when you talk about proportion in deaths per 100,000, you can see that we are way above any other group right now. So why is this happening? Well, we bear the burden of a lot of the chronic medical conditions that put people at risk, including lung and heart disease, the inequities that exist that I spoke about earlier, and unfortunately poverty that is another result of systemic and institutional racism. But other things that I think are important to talk about is that we are right now overrepresented in essential jobs like transportation, like government, like healthcare and food and supply services, and in low wage or temporary jobs that put us directly on the front lines. Other things that come into play are education barriers that may prevent people from understanding best practices to stay safe during the pandemic. And lastly, access to key resources during this pandemic have made this very difficult, including lack of access to internet and telephone and reliable telephone resources. So let's talk about how this has manifested in recent times in research and in clinical trials. This graph that looks at data from 2015 through to 2019 shows the percentage of patients by race in clinical trials. And as you can see, the dark blue accounts for our community, and we're grossly underrepresented. But I hope that I've made clear some of the reasons why this has come. And if not, let's look at some other markers here that I think are important. So the Pew Research Center has done some excellent work through survey research to look at how our community are more skeptical of experimental treatments and potential COVID-19 vaccine than other groups. When asked in surveys and looking at the benefits outweighing the risks and allowing more access to experimental treatments before completion of clinical trials, our community was more likely to believe this wasn't true. And when asked if they would definitely or probably get a COVID-19 vaccine, if it were available today, again, we were less likely to do so, with only 54%, which is just not good enough for the fact that we are leading the charge as far as morbidity and death. Again, we had less positive views of medical scientists than other groups. When asked, do we have a great deal of confidence in medical scientists to act in the best interests of the public? Look at that percentage, 35%. 35%. And again, we were only 53 and 61% had positive views of medical research and scientists or of medical doctors. And so again, that issue around medical distrust to me seems to be where the issue lies. But I want to end my part of this presentation by looking potentially and starting maybe a conversation in the Q&A around what a path forward may look like. Number one, there needs to be open and transparent communication and participation. And thanks to the leadership of folks on this call, we are part of communities that are doing just that today. However, we need to take this a step further. We're not going to create a trust overnight. That's not something that can be fabricated from thin air. This has to start with community partnerships that have been working in our communities for years and years now, laying the foundation for these relationships that are centered around trust and partnering with them to do so. But lastly, it is time for national leadership to pay attention to this. And I am encouraged by Vice President-elect by President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, and the charge that they have put in putting racial equity as one of the 4 cornerstones for their administration during their time. This has to be backed, though, by funding and policy to make sure that we have implementation. I have hope, but my hope is charged with the fact that we have to now take accountability and leadership for our community in ensuring that we get there. I am encouraged by the likes of Dr. Corbett and her phenomenal work, and for the leaders on this call who have been doing this work for many years now. And my belief is that as we continue to advocate for our community, we will get there. Thank you so much for inviting me today.
Dr. Davis, thank you so much for that very, very informative presentation. We have lots of questions at the end of our talk today. I just want to add, when we were talking about mistrust, yesterday I was fortunate to have the opportunity, along with several African-American women's organizations in the United States, a Zoom up close and personal meeting with Dr. Stephen Hahn, who's the FDA commissioner, Dr. Peter Marks, who happens to be the director of the Center for Biological Research and Evaluation at the FDA, as well as Rear Admiral Richardi Arroyo. And they all, the 3 of them, sort of presented to us the timeline with respect to what's going to be happening with respect to the delivery of the vaccine information to the FDA. But I think they heard from all of us this issue about mistrust. And I think I believe, and I don't think any of the women on that Zoom call held back at all. So FDA is quite aware of the mistrust that our community has. As I said, vaccines don't prevent diseases, vaccinations do. I'm going to toss the baton now to Dr. Leon McDougle. We're happy to have him tonight because we are collaborating with the National Medical Association. I'm so happy about that. I'm also a member of the National Medical Association. Dr. McDougle, talk to us about partnerships that we're doing now with the National Medical Association that are going to be so important in what we're going to be doing in messaging, which is extremely important, messaging about these vaccines to our community as well as other issues. Dr. McDougle.
Thank you so much, Dr. Banks. I'm going to share my slides here. All right. So with this evening's discussion, I'm going to speak on why Black people should participate in clinical trials. I'm going to just talk to it, speak to it from a different angle. Also describe what the National Medical Association has been doing in regards to coalition building. And then we're going to speak to how does one sign up for a clinical trial. So to start, I'm going to go back in history also. And I love this quote from Dr. King when he was imprisoned in the Birmingham jail in 1963. Most of the times when we hear this quote, it's only the first sentence. But as you can see, the rest of this speaks to community and mutuality, and think about this in the global pandemic setting that we are in today. So we are tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. Staying on that theme, this 2020 has really brought me to delving more into history and reading about Dr. King. The 1960s really are are a comparable time, and the text here, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? All right. Sorry. So now, this speaks to why we are here together, the links and the National Medical Association. Dr. King gave us orders in 1968 when there are complex, big problems that need to be addressed. He charged us with being a part of that solution. So what do we see here? Calling for a united front with the Black church, the Black media, Black fraternities and sororities, and Black professional organizations. So that's speaking to us here this evening. The Links Incorporated and the National Medical Association. Now, I'm going to speak to some coalition building. So this year has been fascinating. And one of the collaborations that has been brought together is in joining with the Rainbow Push Coalition, and founded by Reverend Jesse L. Jackson Sr., the National Medical Association, the National Bar Association, and we published a public health manifesto April of 2020. And this involved collaboration with the National Black Nurses Association, the National Pharmaceutical Association, the Association of American Indian Physicians, the Association of or the Hispanic Medical Association, and the Infectious Disease Society of America, and others. And we'll get to some more of these organizations. So, and now the Links. And we connected with the Links last year in Columbus. So with this collaboration, this coalition building, we spoke earlier to learning more about what's going on the national scene. So I had the privilege to collaborate and work with Reverend Jackson, and him convening a meeting with, that's General Perner right there, and also Dr. Hlatshwayo, the Chief Medical Advisor for Operation Warp Speed, and General Perner.
Lost.
I think we've lost Dr. McDougle, but we will certainly come back to him when we when he is able to come back. Is it possible now to take a few of our questions?
Sure.
Moderator, Dr. Banks.
Absolutely.
Let's see if we can technology, if we can get the slide down. There we are. All right.
Absolutely. And let me know when we're ready to bring Dr. McDougle back on. A couple of questions, Dr. Corbett and Dr. Davis. First question, what do the vaccines provide immediate protection?
So the vaccines, and I'm correcting that everyone can hear me, right? The vaccines provide protection. So the vaccines that you're seeing from Pfizer and Moderna are a 2-dose regimen. So that means that you get 1 dose and then you come back 3 or 4 weeks later and you get a 2nd dose. And then you start to see a really high immune response after that 2nd dose of vaccine. There is some preliminary data around there being immune responses that are high enough after the 1st dose, but what's being tested in the clinical trials is a 2-dose regimen. So one might expect that it might take 5 to 6 weeks to build the type of immune response that you would need to be protected. And that's the type of data that's reflected in those efficacy numbers that we see with the 95%.
Dr. Davis, any comments?
I mean, she knocked it out the park. I think that's all that needs to be said.
Great. Next question. You mentioned some of the side effects. Have we started clinical trials in children?
So we have not yet started clinical trials in children. We understand that this is a critical population, but as you can understand, the protocols that need to be developed around children, especially around ensuring, the safety of such trials, take a little bit more work. So a lot of us in pediatric, in the pediatric side of infectious diseases, definitely want to see this happen. And projections, and Dr. Corbett can speak to this more, are that could happen anytime within the next 1 to 5 years. But right now, the data does not reflect children.
Dr. Corbett?
That is correct. So Pfizer has started to pare down their aging in their clinical trials, where they're starting to enroll 16-year-olds and then they'll go down to 15, 14 as you get safety in each of those different subsets. But I agree there is a lot more space for developing vaccines in the pediatric realm. I think as we think about the amount of vaccines that are even going to be needed to vaccinate the world, the adult population of the world, I think it was really strategic to start with adults that tend to succumb to the disease faster than children. Children are generally okay. And also with the elderly. So you saw that the elderly populations were rolled into clinical trials after getting some of the safety signals in the young adults. And so it is a stepwise process, this development. And so I think that many companies will start to enroll children in clinical trials. And she's right, and probably, a couple years, we'll start to see vaccines go into children in general use.
Thank you. Our next question. So how will the vaccine be distributed? Can either of you or both of you talk about who gets the vaccine first, second, and third?
So I can start off a little bit on that topic. Currently, there is a general idea about what must happen, but we need to be clear here. While the data is preliminary, very, very reassuring, we still need final data to go through external review boards, and then at that time, move forward with a general rollout plan. But we do have certain tenets in place about what that will likely look like. And the first is to make it available to high-risk populations, and those include some of the folks we've talked about on this call in our presentations, in people who have been disproportionately affected, notably here, the elderly, and then people with underlying health conditions that put them at higher risk. Additionally, there will be prioritization placed on frontline workers who are specifically working with this population of patients for two reasons, for them, but also to make sure that we have the workforce available to be able to continue to take care of patients. That will leave the general public that aren't part of these higher risk groups to receive it in the final wave. And our predictions here that will likely be around March or April of next year.
Great. Do we have Dr. McDougle back? Dr. McDougle, can you hear us?
His sound is still.
I don't know. Is he back?
Yeah, unfortunately, his sound seems to not be picked up.
Right. So we have other questions. How do either of you envision the tracking nightmares and barriers with respect to getting one vaccination followed up by two? Have either of you given some thought to that, especially when it comes to our community, people of color?
I think you probably can speak better to that as a practicing physician and seeing how Gardasil is a multi-dose vaccine, et cetera.
Yeah, so, you know, people, as much as there's a lot of concern around how we're going to roll this out and then be able to do this in the way that you're describing and be able to track. I think it's important for us to take a step back and realize that we've been developing vaccines for many, many years now. This is a tried and true process that has many aspects built into it. And the reason why you've seen such a measure of success currently is because of the work of people like Dr. Corbett, who dedicated their entire careers to making sure that not only is this happening, but it's happening with a high degree of ethical practices and checks and balances. We currently have vaccines that have to be given in not only one dose, but 2 or 3. We do this with routine frequency. And so we have tried and true blueprints to make sure this can be done. However, I'm not trying to oversell it either, right? Again, any new vaccine and rollout plan has to be thought about adequately. But I'll tell you what, it's the folks on this call who've made sure that there have been checks and balances at every step along the way that have gotten us to this point where, I mean, think about where we were in March and April, right? There was not a lot of hope, not a lot of data, and not a lot of moving forward. And I must credit the fact that we have been consistent about using our history and knowing how to deal with these things, coupled with the fact that there has been an uprising, specifically in our community, to make sure that there are checks and balances in place. So for me, I'm very hopeful and confident that we will be able to track this because we have a tried and true record, and we now have a vested interest in our own community.
Dr. Corbett, I'm going to give you this question, and I just want to clarify for our audience. The Pfizer vaccine has a temperature requirement of -70, and Moderna does not. Is that correct?
Correct.
So how do you see that in terms of the vaccine distribution, or who might succeed, or et cetera?
You know, I think we have a record, as was said before, of getting vaccines to the places that they need to get, and other medicines. For example, there are Ebola drugs that have gotten to sub-Saharan Africa that needed to be on the cold chain. Obviously, we're working with larger volumes in this case, but Pfizer has stated that they have a strategy around the way that they do that, understanding that these companies are companies that are rich, and they can pull the types of strings that need to be pulled around refrigeration, freezers, and purchasing sites to store vaccines, and all of these things. And so I think there might be some hiccups along the distribution, particularly outside of the United States of America, but I think that we will eventually get it right. And as well as we're rolling out these vaccines, the technology, it continues to increasingly get better. For example, Moderna just announced their data around being able to store the vaccine at refrigerator temperature for 30 days. When we started these clinical trials, that number was only a week or 2. And so as the technology continues to get better, and as they put effort into studying actually how viable the vaccine is over time at different temperatures, I think that it'll get better. I think that eventually we'll get to the point where it'll be room temperature and be able to distribute very frequently around the world. So I think that the companies are very invested in making sure that this happens.
I have a question with respect to that. I have read, and is it true they're already working on 2nd generation vaccines, that this might even be obsolete within a year, that we might not be at a two dose vaccine? How close are we? Is that true, fact, or fallacy?
So there are over 230 vaccines in the entire COVID-19 vaccine pipeline around the world. That is various amounts of either from the academic side, government sides in different countries, corporations and companies and pharma. And they all have their own different intricacies, such as 1 dose, 2 dose, the type of platform, whether it be messenger RNA, like you're hearing about with Pfizer and Moderna, or protein, et cetera. And so there are multiple generations of vaccines that one could expect to finally roll out, that add to even the United States' current portfolio of 5 that are in phase 3 clinical trial. And obsolete is not how obsolete is not really necessarily how I view it. I mean, my team actually had a backup plan. I can safely say that now that we have efficacy, that we would have been ready to pull the trigger on a phase 1 clinical trial immediately had our efficacy results not been on par. And so, of course, people are thinking about their 2nd and 3rd plans. But by all accounts, with the type of portfolio that the Globe has put forward, we should be good for years with vaccines, and we'll start to see data in all different types of populations, ethnicities, and et cetera.
Great. Dr. McDougle, I think you're on audio with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I know I'm sorry. You know, I think I may need to buy a new computer. Yes. So just let me know how I can help. I can, if you'd like, I can finish the presentation.
Yes, I think you stopped at the slides that you had with Operation Push, where you were on with the general who is going to be with Operation Warp Speed, and with Dr. Redfield. I believe I saw him on one of the slides. So why don't you take it from there?
Okay, all right. And there's only 11 slides in total. And so let me get back to that. Okay, so what I was speaking to here with Dr. Redfield, and having an opportunity to talk with him and question him about some of the concerns we had about the Centers for Disease Control. Our previous speaker, Dr. Hlatshwayo, spoke to how data was a concern, and that it wasn't being reported, including demographic information. So we joined with the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust and Congresswoman Robin Kelly in demanding this data. Also, Blacks, Hispanics, and American Indian tribes were designated as having priority for testing and not having to have symptoms in order to be tested. That was actually published on the CDC website, and that was consistent with what we had advocated for on the 12-point COVID-19 Public Health Manifesto. So we were pleased to see that. But guess what? 3 days later, it disappeared. And so we contacted CDC to try to find out why that disappeared. And we were told, well, it was a mistake. That was an error. And so I'll move on here. I got lots of stories. And so to kind of bring this to a close, I really want to speak to the importance of people from our community participating in clinical trials. And so this is kind of a step-by-step way of doing this. So if you go to the Coronavirus Prevention Network, this website, this is a page that you will see. And so I'm showing you what I did. So I signed up for a clinical trial. And so you'll see this nice page there. You click on that button, and then you get to this page here, and it asks some demographic questions. Ask, how how often do you go to the gym and things of that sort, to look for risk factors in regards to transmission of COVID-19, and then you come to the end. You get success, and there's a really nice video that explains the next steps. And so I know we've emphasized the history of Blacks not being treated properly in the health system, the research enterprise. So I'd like to say, in regards to other reasons why we should participate. So when a safe and effective vaccine is developed, we want to know that it's effective for us. And when we look at the disparate outcomes, that when you look at age-adjusted death rates, Blacks 3.4 times that of European Americans, Latinx populations 3.3 times that of European Americans, Indigenous populations, American Indians 3.3 times that of European Americans. So we need to be in a place and speak to this community, speak to our community, and programs like this with the links is just so vital, because we don't want that gap of health outcomes to widen with the European American and other populations getting in line for the vaccine, and then our populations having mistrust. So we're building coalitions. Dr. Reed Tuckson has brought together groups with the National Urban League, the National Black Nurses Association, the Montague Cobb Health Institute, the National Medical Association. We're joining with the Links Incorporated. We've talked to and reaching out to clergy, Reverend Watley. And so this coalition of trusted messengers in the Black community is what is needed to increase uptake of any vaccine developed that we deem to be safe and effective. We aim to be a bridge of interpretation for the Black community as it pertains to COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics through our COVID-19 task force established by the National Medical Association. So this coalition needs to continue, and I want to commend the Links and President Jeffries Leonard and Dr. Banks and Dr. Virginia Kane, who's also on our task force and also on the Links task force, and our very own Dr. Vivian Penn. So that concludes my talk this evening. I'm glad we were able to come up with a solution. Now I need to get a new computer.
Thank you, Dr. McDougle. We have just a couple more questions before we end tonight. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Dr. McDougle, do we know whether or not Pfizer has Pfizer or Moderna reached out to the National Medical Association or other African-American organizations?
Yes, so we have met with Pfizer twice, and we have a third meeting with Pfizer on Friday, tomorrow. And our group is comprised of infectious disease specialists, members of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, member of the California State Advisory Committee, infectious disease for pediatrics, state health or county health commissioners. So we have a robust group. We've met with Moderna with plans to have another meeting. We've also met with AstraZeneca, and our plans include meeting with those pharmaceutical companies that have those American vaccine candidates through Operation Warp Speed and otherwise. So the conversations have been fruitful and will allow us, in addition to the other entities that are evaluating data and having questions answered to help to make sure that we can be confident in decisions made by the FDA.
The last question is, I think a lot of people have sent this same question, is this vaccine, are these vaccines going to be offered for free?
Yes, they are going to be free, and it's also my understanding that the administration of the vaccines, there's evidently plans being made so that administration is free also. The pharmaceutical companies have received money to pay for the vaccines actually up front. So they have the money as far as paying for the vaccine itself. Now, I think the part that needs to be more solidified is the covering of costs for the administration. And I know from what I'm hearing, the Biden administration plans to make that a reality.
Excellent. Well, I would like to thank our three panel members tonight. I think we're going to close. Reluctantly, I'm sure that the audience has many more questions and we could be here for a lot longer period of time. This has been a wonderful, a robust conversation, robust presentations by Dr. Corbett, Dr. Davis, and Dr. McDougle. Thank you so much for participating with us tonight. I'm sure we'll hopefully have another town hall soon. I'm going to turn this back over to our Madam President, Kim Jeffries Leonard.
Thank you so much, Dee. Thank you for your wonderful moderation. This has truly been a transformative discussion. This brilliant panel of Black experts have provided us with a clear overview of the vaccine process and clinical trials. They've reminded us that because of our legacy of racial trauma, and particularly in a time such as this, we are so very afraid, but they clearly articulated why we must be represented in getting clinical trials and getting an effective vaccine. They've given us a path forward. They've taught us how to sign up for a trial. So I want to take another minute to thank our moderator, our very own Dr. Virginia D. Banks, to the rest of our panelists, Dr. Corbett, Dr. Davis, and Dr. McDougle. We are so pleased with our partnership because we are so much more powerful when we are together. So you will be seeing more of the Links Incorporated and the National Medical Association doing things together. I want to thank all of you who have joined us, because this says that you're taking an active interest in your health as it relates to COVID-19. I cannot leave this without thanking our COVID-19 task force. This is a group of 10 of our members who work in the field of medicine or have expertise in public health. They not only help to organize this town hall, but they keep our membership safe. Thank you, and thank you to our co-chair who is here. So all of you who've joined us, we have our charge. We know what we must do. We've got to get involved because our involvement will make the difference. We need to stay vigilant. We need to stay safe. We need to stay encouraged. We need to stay home for Thanksgiving. Have a happy one, but have it at home. Together, we will get there. Thank you all so much. Good night.